Good morning everyone. This is Raghu, Assistant Professor of Biotechnology from SR and BGNR Government College, Khammam. So today's topic is antigen antibody reactions. So in the previous classes we have seen the structure of antibody, and we also know the valency of antibody, that is 2. That means each antibody can bind with 2 antigens, with some exceptions like dimers and pentamers like IgA and IgM, which can bind to more than 2 antigens at a time. So antigen antibody interactions are non-covalent interactions. Mainly it is hydrogen bonding or electrostatic interactions. So whatever it may be, it is a non-covalent interaction. So antigens are mostly proteinaceous in nature. So if proteins are there, the immune response will be better. So the antibodies will bind to these antigenic proteins or peptides with non-covalent interaction and form lattice structures. So these antibodies not only bind with the antigens in vivo, but in vitro conditions also the antibodies will bind to the antigens, giving some reactions. So these reactions are called as antigen antibody reactions. So in today's class we will discuss the different types of antigen antibody reactions. Well, coming into the antigen antibody reactions, the first one is precipitation reaction. Second one, agglutination reaction. Third, complement fixation test. Fourth one is ELISA, enzyme linked immunosorbent assay. Immunofluorescence and radioimmunoassay. So these are the different antigen antibody reactions which will occur in vitro conditions: precipitation reaction, agglutination, complement fixation test, ELISA, radioimmunoassay and immunofluorescence. So the first one is precipitation reaction. Here the interaction is between soluble antigen and the antibody. When a soluble antigen combines with its antibody in the presence of an electrolyte at a particular temperature and pH, it forms an insoluble precipitate of antigen-antibody complex. The antibody causing precipitation is called precipitin, and the reaction is called as precipitation reaction. So here the antibodies will bind to antigens which are soluble in nature. So the antibodies which are going to bind with the antigen, soluble antigen, are called as precipitins, and the reaction is called as precipitation reaction. You can clearly see the binding of antibodies in the diagram with that of antigens and forming antigen antibody complexes. These antigen antibody complexes are insoluble. That means it is an insoluble precipitate that is formed between a soluble antigen and with that of antibody. So the best examples for the precipitin reactions are radial immunodiffusion and double immunodiffusion. So you can clearly see in radial immunodiffusion, the antigens are present at the center. Surrounding that, antibodies are present. So how this is made is, a glass slide is taken and an agarose gel is allowed to solidify on the glass plate. After that, punctures are made in radial manner and at the center of the agarose gel. Now you will introduce antigen at the center, and on the remaining radial wells you will introduce your antibody. And this particular plate is incubated at a particular temperature, that is at 37 degrees centigrade in a humidity chamber. After some time you can clearly see the diffusion of these antigens or antibodies in a radial manner, such that the antibody will bind to this soluble antigen, forming a precipitin ring, insoluble precipitin ring. You can clearly see the precipitin ring where antigen and antibodies are seen bound together. So this is radial immunodiffusion. In double immunodiffusion, same thing will happen, but you take a slide and place agarose gel on that slide and make two punctures as shown in the diagram. One is for antibody and the other for antigen, and introduce your antigen antibody reagents on each well which are present opposite to each other, and allow it for incubation. You can see the movement of these antibodies and antigens, and at a site where both will meet with each other, forming a insoluble precipitin line. So the antibodies will bind to the soluble antigen and form a insoluble precipitin line. So that is double immunodiffusion. So radial immunodiffusion, you will allow radial movement of your antigens and antibodies. In double immunodiffusion, towards a single way, forming a precipitin line in the glass slide. So these are the examples of precipitin reactions: single immunodiffusion and double immunodiffusion. So next one is agglutination. In this agglutination reaction, the antibody will react with particulate antigen, results in visible clumping called agglutination. So in the previous precipitin reaction, the antibody is reacting with the soluble antigen, but in agglutination reaction, the antibody is reacting with particulate antigen, forming a clumping, clear visible clumping called agglutination. The particulate antigens include bacteria, white blood cells, red blood cells, latex particles, etc. Antibodies which are involving in this reaction are called as agglutinins. If agglutination reaction involves red blood cells, then it is called as hemagglutination. So in precipitin reaction, the reaction between antibody and soluble antigen. In agglutination, the reaction is between antibody and particulate antigen, showing a clear clumping or agglutination. So best example is hemagglutination. So that is process of ABO blood grouping. So ABO blood grouping. So in ABO blood grouping kit, you can see three different types of reagents: antibody A, antibody B, and anti-D, that is antibody against RH factor. So you will take a glass slide which is having three wells, and you will puncture your finger a little bit such that blood will be coming out, and you will place this blood in these wells which are present on the glass slides. After that, to the three wells you will add anti-A, anti-B and anti-RH factor, anti-D reagent. and you will mix clearly. So for example, you take a O positive blood group. When you add antibody against A, antibody against B, it does not show any reaction. But since it is a O positive blood group, RH factor is present on the RBC cells membrane. So anti-RH factor antibodies will bind to these particulate antigens on their red blood cells, forming clumping called as visible agglutination. So O positive blood group persons will give only anti-D reaction. You can clearly see in the diagram. So O negative persons does not give any type of reaction. Since RH factor is also absent on their RBC cell membrane, so anti-A, anti-B and anti-D, all the three will give negative results for the O negative blood group person. And A positive person, he will show clumping both in anti-A and anti-RH factor as shown in the figure. For A negative person, he will show only clumping in anti-A region. Then B positive, he will show clumping on B region as well as anti-RH region. B negative only in the B antibody B region. Whereas AB positive person will show clumping in all the three wells. You can clearly see antibody A, antibody B and antibody against RH factor. The clumping is clearly seen in all the three wells with respect to AB positive person. With AB negative person, the first two wells will show the clumping. So this is the process of agglutination, which is called as heme agglutination in ABO blood grouping. So the next one is inhibition of agglutination. Inhibition of agglutination. So generally the best example is pregnancy kits, which are used to test whether a particular woman is pregnant or not. So the pregnancy test follows the principle of agglutination. So that is clumping. So how it will work is, so if you find the kit, there will be a strip which will shows lines. Based on the lines, you will confirm whether it is positive or negative. So when there is no reaction, you won't find any red line in the test kit, then it will be negative. If heme agglutination occurs, then it will turn into red in color. And if you stop the process of agglutination also, it will give no color. So for example, when there is no reaction, there will be no color development. When there is a reaction, that is heme agglutination, then there will be red color development. And when there is an inhibition of agglutination also, there is no reaction. So this is the principle of agglutination of test kits or pregnancy kits. So we will see what happens in that. So the kit contains, so the only indication is human chorionic gonadotrophin is released in the urine when a particular woman is pregnant. HCG, human chorionic gonadotrophin. So the kit contains antibody against HCG. You can clearly see antibody against HCG. And a hapten carrier conjugate. Hapten carrier conjugate. So you can clearly see HCG. So this anti-HCG antibody which is present in the kit can bind to HCG carrier conjugate, forming visible clumping. Forming visible clumping. So you can clearly see visible clumping. If at all clumping is not observed, then the reaction is positive. That means how it happens is, if at all the urine contains HCG, the antibodies present in the kit sample will bind to the HCG in the urine rather than the carrier conjugate that is present in the kit. So there will be no visible clumping of antibody carrier conjugate. Instead, the antibodies will go and bind to the HCG that is present in the urine. So if HCG is present, there will be no visible clumping. If HCG is absent, there will be a visible clumping between antibodies and the hapten carrier conjugate present in the kit. So this is how the kit works, and it is used for detection of pregnancy. So that is the reaction behind inhibition of agglutination, generally used as a principle in pregnancy test kits. So the next one is immunofluorescence. Immunofluorescence. Use of antibodies which are labeled with fluorescent compounds is called as immunofluorescence. So, in cell biology experiments, in order to identify a particular cell in a tissue or to identify a particular cell organelle in a cell, these radio-labeled antibodies are utilized. Sometimes they are also used to separate cells, different kinds of cells which express, for example, if you take T helper cells and T cytotoxic cells. T helper cells contain CD4 receptor on their cell, whereas T cytotoxic cells they contain CD8 receptor on their cell. If you want to isolate CD8 containing cells and CD4 containing cells separately, you use a fluorescent antibody which is labeled with a fluorescent dye. For example, if you want to separate CD8 containing cells from CD4, you can use this antibody against CD8 containing cells. So these fluorescent antibodies will go and bind to CD8 containing cells, and then these cells are separated by using fluorescent activated cell sorter. It's an instrument, FACS, which will separate the cells based on the fluorescence. So by using fluorescent labeled antibodies, we can separate the cells by using fluorescent activated cell sorter. So immunofluorescence is a mechanism of using antibodies which are fluorescently labeled. For example, some reactions, enzymes are used, enzyme labeled antibodies are used, but you cannot identify these enzyme labeled antibody reactions by using fluorescent microscope or fluorescent activated cell sorter. But these enzyme labeled antibodies are used especially in Western blotting, where you can visualize the bands with your normal eyes only, without any fluorescent microscope or FACS. So that is enzyme labeled antibodies. If it is labeled with a fluorescent compound, then you have to use fluorescent microscope or fluorescent activated cell sorter for separation of the cells from a group of cells. If it is labeled, then in order to identify a particular cell organelle or nucleus or mitochondria or chloroplast, we can use fluorescent antibodies, and you can observe under fluorescent microscope. So that is the use of fluorescent labeled antibodies and immunofluorescence. So this is the image of using fluorescent microscope. So these are the cells, and the red color centered structures are nucleus. So these are neurological cells which are stained with GFP antibodies, which are labeled with GFP, and also antibodies which are labeled with acridine orange. So they labeled the entire cell structure, they differentiated the nucleus from the entire cell structure with orange color. This fluorescent view can be viewed with the help of fluorescent microscope. So that is the use of fluorescently labeled antibodies in staining of cells, which can be used by fluorescent microscope. So the next one is ELISA. As I mentioned in the previous slides, the antibodies can be also labeled with the enzyme. So that enzyme will give a colored reaction with the substrate. So here in direct ELISA, only a single type of antibody is used, and that antibody is directly labeled with the enzyme. In indirect ELISA, the primary antibody will bind to antigen, and the secondary antibody is labeled with an enzyme. So in direct ELISA, antibody which is labeled with an enzyme is directly used for binding with antigen. In indirect ELISA, anti-antibody is used which is labeled for binding to the primary antibody. So that is the major difference between direct and indirect ELISA. So you can see the difference between indirect and direct ELISA. So in indirect ELISA, you will be using anti-antibodies, whereas in direct ELISA, you are using only antibodies which are labeled with enzyme. So in indirect ELISA, first the well is coated with an antigen. So ELISA is especially performed to identify either antigens in the patient serum or antibodies in the patient serum. You can detect either antibodies in the patient serum or you can detect antigens in the patient serum. So most probably antigens will give accurate results. For example, if you want to detect antibodies in the patient serum, then you will go for indirect ELISA. Then you will use wells which are coated with antigens. So for example, if you want to identify hepatitis B virus antibodies in the patient serum, so then you will coat the well with antigens, hepatitis B antigens. Then you will wash the wells. After that, you will add the patient serum. Then if antibodies are present in the patient serum, they will bind to the hepatitis B antigens in the well. Then after that, you use an secondary antibody labeled with an enzyme. Then after that, wash, then add a substrate, and the enzyme present on the secondary antibody will convert the substrate into a colored product that can be read with the help of a spectrophotometer or a calorimeter. The intensity of the color developed base depends on the number of antibodies which contains the enzymes, and the number of antibodies binding into the well depends upon the concentration of the antibodies in the patient serum. If the concentration of antibodies in the patient serum is more, then the secondary antibody binding will be more and the color development will also be more. That means the diseases or the antibody concentration in the patient serum will be more, that disease will be more. That means antigens are present in large number in the patient serum. And the next one is sandwich ELISA. In this sandwich ELISA, you can identify the antigens in the patient's serum. For this, you use wells which are coated with antibodies. So after that, you wash the well and add patient serum. If the patient serum contains the antigens will go and bind to the antibodies coated in the well. After that, give a wash and add secondary antibody. So here it is not called as secondary antibody, it is a primary antibody only, labeled with an enzyme. So it will go and bind to the antigens present on the antibodies which are labeled in the well. So you can clearly see the binding pattern of antigens of the patient serum are sandwiched in between two antibodies. Hence it is called as double antibody sandwiched ELISA. And now you add a substrate which is converted into a colored product by the enzyme which is linked to the antibody. So this is how you identify the antigens in the patient serum using ELISA. So using ELISA, you can identify either the antigens in the patient serum or antibodies against the antigens in the patient serum. So that is indirect and sandwich ELISA. So the next technique is radioimmunoassay. So this particular assay is used to identify the amount of antigens present in the patient serum. For this, you coat the wells with an antibodies for which against the antigens for which you have to identify in the patient serum. So the wells are coated with antigens. For example, it is hepatitis B antigen to be identified. So antibodies against these antigens are coated in the well, and a radio-labeled hepatitis B antigen is added into the well. If at all, so you can clearly see the diagram B, antibodies and radio-labeled hepatitis B surface antigens. So these will bind with the antibodies present in the well. Now you will add the virginal patient serum sample which contains the hepatitis B virus antigens. So if the patient's serum contains the hepatitis B antigens, it will go and bind to the antibodies present in the well by replacing the radio-labeled antigens present in the well. That means after reading each well, if the patient's serum contains the antigens, they will replace the radio-labeled antigens present in the well. The intensity of radioactivity will be decreasing, giving a positive result in the well. That means, for example, the first one B is a control where the serum does not contain any antigen. So then the radioactivity will be 100%. For example, if the serum contains antigens, it is replacing the radio-labeled I-125 surface antigens such that the radioactivity will be decreasing from 100% to around 10 to 20%, indicating that the patient serum is containing the original hepatitis B antigens. So this is called as radioimmunoassay, which is used to detect the antigens present in the patient serum based on the decreasing the radioactivity of the antigens in the well. So that is radioimmunoassay. So the next one antigen antibody interaction is Western blotting. It is also called as immunoblotting. So in this technique, antigenic proteins can be identified using labeled antibodies. So the labeled antibodies may be either fluorescent labeled antibodies or radio labeled antibodies or sometimes enzyme labeled antibodies. So the technique you already know. So you will subject the patient's serum to SDS gel electrophoresis. For example, if you have 10 patients at a time, you can perform 10 samples using polyacrylamide, SDS polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis. Based on the number of wells present, you can carry out that number of experiments. So after gel electrophoresis, you will subject to blotting, electroblotting, transferring the protein bands in the agarose polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis onto a nitrocellulose membrane. So that is called as blotting, electroblotting. And after transferring onto blotting paper, you incubate this nitrocellulose blotting paper with antibodies, either with enzyme labeled antibodies or radio labeled antibodies. If you are using an enzyme labeled antibody, you can directly add the substrate, which will be converted into a colored product, and it can be viewed as a band on the membrane. If you are using a radio labeled antibody, subject this blotting paper to autoradiography. That means exposure of this nitrocellulose membrane to X-ray film. So after exposure to X-ray film and after development of this X-ray film, you can view the proteins as a bands, which is shown in the figure. So you can clearly see the protein bands. So that means the radio labeled antibodies play an important role in forming bands on the X-ray film. So that is autoradiography technique. So this is how you use radio labeled antibodies or enzyme labeled antibodies for identification of antigenic proteins or peptides which are present in the patient's serum by SDS, page and autoradiography experiments. So that is Western blotting. So the last one in antigen antibody reactions is complement fixation test. So we know the complement proteins. These complement proteins will bind to the Fc region of the antibodies. So that is the role of complement proteins in mediating the immune response. So you can clearly see in the diagram so there is an antigen and a complement system. Serum with antibody against the antigen. If you add all these three, the antibodies will bind to the antigen and the complement will be fixed. If there is no antibody in the serum, if you add antigen and complement, since antibodies are absent, complement fixation does not take place. So this is the principle of complement fixation test. Whenever the patient serum contains antibodies, if you add the test reagent, the complement will be fixed. If the patient serum does not contain any antibodies, then complement is not fixed. So that is complement fixation test. So you can see the diagram in the right hand side. It's a test kit for complement fixation test where a sheep RBC is used to identify whether complement fixed or not. So sheep RBC, antibodies against sheep RBC, and complement proteins. So what you will do is, to the first test tube, which is shown in the left, where the patient serum contains antibodies, and the complement is fixed, you will add sheep RBC and antibody against sheep RBC. Since the complement is already fixed because antibodies are present in the patient's serum, there is no complement proteins available and no hemolysis of RBC cells will occur, and the test is positive. So in the next test tube where antibodies are not available, you have complement proteins and antigen. Now you add sheep RBC and antibody against sheep RBC. Now the antibodies will go and bind to sheep RBC and immediately complement will be fixed and hemolysis of sheep RBC will take place, giving a negative test. So that means if the patient antibody serum contains antibodies, then the complement will be fixed and this complement is not used for hemolysis of sheep RBC, then the test will be positive. If the patient serum does not contain antibodies, the complement proteins will be free and these complement proteins are fixed with sheep RBC antibodies and the hemolysis of sheep RBC will take place, giving a negative test. If there is no hemolysis, the test is positive. That means antibodies are present in the patient serum. If there is a hemolysis, then the test is negative. That means antibodies is present in the patient serum. So this is how complement fixation tests are used for identification of antibodies in the patient serum. So those are the antigen antibody reactions which are used for identification of antigens as well as antibodies against antigens in the patient's serum. So thank you for patiently listening the topic.